Former President Donald Trump was indicted today for trying to overturn his loss to Joe Biden.
We have to win in November, or we're not going to have Pennsylvania. They'll change the name. They're going to change the name of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvanians have a unique role with democracy and freedom. We have seen Pennsylvanians rise up at the ballot box.
The work of making this world resemble one that you would prefer to live in is a lunch pail job.
Hi, welcome to the Keystone Reckoning podcast. I'm your host, Jesse White. Today, we'll be continuing our deep dive into legislative redistricting with our guest, Stephen Caruso of the Penn Capital Star. For part one of this interview, please visit KeystoneReckoning.com or go wherever you get your podcast. Again, thank you for listening. Enjoy.
You know, during the last redistricting, I've always thought that one of the big mistakes that if you got the Republicans who drew those maps drunk and asked them if they would do it all over again the same way, is that one of the things they did was they took what were those marginal Republican seats, might be a 5-point Republican district, right? 55-45 or something like that. And they, where a Democrat could win in a given cycle against a certain opponent, it's not impossible, right?
Yeah.
They made those like 65-35 districts. There were 70-30 districts. So, and they did it by saying, okay, here, Lancaster or Harrisburg, we're going to give you this uber blue district, but then we're going to take everything around it. And so what happened was you have a bunch of Republicans who just didn't have to ever worry about Democrats from an election point of view. And what it did was, so this coincides almost exactly with the Tea Party movement, within a year or two. And what I saw, and you saw inside the chamber, was you saw moderate Republicans disappear, primaried out in no time. And you saw a scenario where Republican members didn't care about Democratic pressure. They were more worried about placating the far right base because that's how they got to stay in office, was in their primary, just like a liberal Democrat would in an urban area. But the difference is there were a lot more of them on the Republican side, and I think that when you look at the overall impact of that, it led to a much greater polarization within the chamber, where people say, "Oh, how come members can't work together anymore? And where's bipartisanship?" I feel as though in some ways, having been there kind of before and after those maps, that the maps themselves kind of forced legislators further apart, by in the basis of, look, you've got to, represent your district and do what you have to make your constituents happy. And I wonder if by doing this, you're going to have a more competitive overall chamber. Right, who's going to control it could vary from one cycle to the next, but within that chamber, the polarization will be greater than ever. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, no, that does, and that is a concern that has been raised by one or two people to me, and I think that is potentially one of the more nuanced critiques that could be made. I would need to do a lot more reporting, a lot more talking to people, but when you reduce the number of competitive districts and you create a bunch more safe blue districts, I don't think, if you give me 1 second here, I will do my level best. Let's see. According to the DRA, all three of the districts that are drawn around Harrisburg, so we're, going from 1 to 3, are going to be about 60% Democratic by their composite. In fact, over 61. Those don't sound like anything that'll be competitive in a general election, unless really bad candidate, really good Republican year. So yeah, those elections are all be decided in primaries, and so that could lead to more of what we've seen, where you win office is you win it in a primary, and then you kind of never have to worry about running against a Republican in this case. So, we'll need to see a little bit more of the numbers. I'll want to see more of the numbers. I'll see more of where incumbents are. There's so much to be seen, but I think that's like, I don't know, my gut read, and I'm not a political scientist or a pundit. I'm just trying to like think about it. Like I've heard that concern, and I think that's a good faith, fair one to think about.
And it is, but also at the same time, I also think, well, let's look at Congress for a minute. We've reached a point in our politics where it is verboten to endorse to support something that the other party's doing, right? If a Democrat suggested it's evil, if Republicans suggested it's evil. And so it almost, in a way, and I'm just kind of spitballing here. There's a million arguments you can make, but I almost wonder, well, maybe this zero sum kind of map is kind of the only way you get anything done, right? It's an all thing. Either the Democrats have the chamber or the Republicans have the chamber, and everybody's going to fall into line. And let's just pray there's no Joe Manchins out there.
Whew. I will maybe one day write a book about political science and my observations. I'm not going to preview it on this podcast, but I think that is that. I think I see where you're coming from.
Right. I mean, because the idea is, look, because the way these elections typically go is, there might be 40 competitive state house races of various ranges of what's competitive. And generally speaking, each party kind of narrows in on their tier 1 races, and there's like 10 or 12 of them. They dump an insanely ungodly amount of money into them, and everybody on the lower tiers gets starved out. And, I've seen numerous, I do consulting work, right? So I've seen numerous instances where there have been good candidates in districts where they could have actually made a good run at it had they had any sort of resources, but because they're not one of the, the hot button, districts, they don't get 1/10 of the resources that these tier 1 races get. And so as a result, it's really not that anything about this is fair, but it's really not a very fair system of determining, I think people don't understand how little it matters that you would be a good representative for your district, how little that factors into whether you get elected. It's astonishing how little that actually factors in. And so by taking and saying, look, we're going to have less, we're going to kind of cement into place this idea that there are only going to be X number of competitive districts. Everything else is going to belong to one side or the other. And we're just going to fight it out in that'll be our battleground. We're not going to pretend it's anything else, right? We're going to fight over those 25 districts, and that'll determine who has control of the House, and everybody else will be on the edges, and that'll be it. And then, and good luck governing. Because to get back to what I was saying, and I kind of got away from it, was with the Republicans 10 years ago, they made these districts so red, right, that it made it hard for them to govern. It really did, because they, there was a period of time where they had all 3 chambers, or they had Corbett in the governor's chair, in the House and the Senate, and the House went from being the more moderate body before redistricting to being by far the most conservative body afterwards. I mean, they made the Senate Republicans look like a bunch of liberals running around, and the problem is that, and we're seeing this on the Democratic side in Congress right now, they just could not build, despite having clear numbers to do whatever they wanted. They could not get their priorities together. It was like liquor privatization, pensions, and something else. Each chamber or each group had their own little thing, and they ended up getting nothing done. Yeah. And we just sat there as Democrats saying, like, this is amazing. How can they not get anything done? And, it feels like that's kind of where this is going to go from here on out. I mean, and we haven't talked about the Senate maps much, but, the Senate, it feels to me like it's going to be a flip-flop chamber now for the next 10 years if these maps go into place. It's like a 26-24 advantage, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, so what I'd say overall with House and Senate, like the maps do appear responsive. So it's not like they should bake in one party's majority. As I said, the House map does close Republicans and Democrats a bit closer to each other, but those, there should be like the seats that are in between that decide a majority should be pretty damn competitive. Same thing with the Senate. Yeah, as you said, I think it is like pretty much looks like knife edge off of the partisan composition of districts we've seen. It does that by, there's like now going to be a blue district around Harrisburg again. The map that the district that got rid of templates is gone. And, I think that, I definitely get what you're coming from. A lot of that's going to come down to inter-party dynamics, inter-caucus dynamics. How good is your leadership team? Like, these are all like intangible legislative things. And I spend all my time following these people around, and I only have like the foggiest interpretations of as best I can. But yeah, I mean, the Senate will be, I think, pretty competitive. One thing I'd look for is the way that Senate map divides the Lehigh Valley is, I think I've seen a lot of complaints from Lehigh Valley legislators, particularly Democrats. I would maybe, there could be some challenges there. Interestingly, Kim Ward or Mark Nordenberg, when he was describing the way the districts in the Lehigh Valley, the Senate districts, actually divide Bethlehem and Allentown. So like both of the valley's largest cities are divided. And Nordenberg specifically said that, like, so one of the districts, it's this weird sort of like J-shaped district, if I'm remembering in my head correctly, that connects like Allentown, like most of Allentown. There's just a few wards that happen to be where State Senator Pat Brown lives that are in a very red district. And most of Allentown, which is a Latino majority city now, if I'm not mistaken, or pretty damn close, is in this district that then like has Allentown, has some northern suburbs, and then scoops up into like very red parts of like, I think that's like the Slate Belt, like places that used to be Democratic but are moving super Republican under Trump. So like it's a district that it's like I think the metrics make it look pretty Democratic. I've talked to politicos from out that way who think it's actually going to be more toss up, maybe like a very good Republican district because of how it's drawn. And doing it divides Allentown, divides Bethlehem. But Mark Nordenberg said, well, drawing it, that it specifically was an idea of Kim Ward and her staff as a way to like create Latino opportunities. And, I think this is also one of those interesting, like dynamics of like, well, what is the Latino community of Allentown going to say and Bethlehem going to say about being split? How is this going to work itself out? You have that incumbency protection point of Pat Brown living in the one part of Allentown that's being chopped off. I'm like the Lehigh, if I were to watch one region on the Senate map, Lehigh Valley has I would say like all my attention.
That's interesting because also, the other thing out there is you already had an announced candidate, Mark Pinsley, who very, very nearly beat Pat Brown 4 years ago. And I've actually consulted with Mark for disclosure purposes.
Well, thank you.
And so I'm wondering, was that designed to kind of to screw Mark in his attempt to take out Pat, or would he be in the new district? Do you know?
I don't know where anyone lives but Pat Brown, and that was I've seen a map or two shared with me. So I'm reasonably confident about Pat Brown. But yeah, I mean, these are all the questions that come out. And it's funny too. Like I also, after these maps were released, started getting press releases in my inbox from House candidates who are running in their new districts that they apparently maybe knew was vaguely happening. So I don't know, the politics of these maps, I think that's why I wanted to cover them so much, because like it's the most pure form of politics that's going to influence all the legislation and policy we see for the next decade, as I've said, there's going to be legal challenges. These are just draft maps. They can change, but like, these, as at least especially in the House, looking at what you have right now, like this is gonna change what the General Assembly looks and feels like for a while if anything like this becomes law.
Right. And it's tough because, in theory, the redistricting process shouldn't really have that kind of the human political element to it. Well, we're going to draw this district based on who might run in this area, but that's what happens. So it's weird. It's this quasi-legal process where, there are rules, but they're not hard and fast rules. And it's a unique process, unlike anything else out there in politics. It's really kind of amazing. Now, one of the things that I wanted to focus on was the response from the Republicans, specifically Carrie Benninghoff, who flipped the table basically in the commission meeting. Can you talk about kind of his response and how that was received?
Yeah. So Kerry Benninghoff, majority leader, he called the partisan gerrymander. We've talked about some of like the dynamics at play here. This map undoubtedly reduces competitive districts. It undoubtedly gives Democrats more safe districts. I think, jury's out if this just hands Democrats a majority. It's going to depend a lot on the year, the candidates, a lot of things. But Kerry also, and they sent a study over from a professor, a political scientist I need to read. But yeah, like at the meeting at one point then, Benninghoff held up there's this really famous, it's where gerrymandering comes from, this very famous political cartoon of this salamander-shaped district from Massachusetts, drawn by Governor Eldridge Gary's allies, and then held up a picture of a district that the map that the commission made drew in north central upper Susquehanna Valley. We're talking like Williamsport, like Milton-ish. None of those places are in the district, but like that's roughly where we're talking. Sure. And I think it was a hell of a visual. It led the AP story, a photo of it. I've seen that story that photo making rounds. So what a lot of this gets into is like, is shape the best way to talk about gerrymandering? I think shape is one of the easiest ways to talk about gerrymandering. It was something that engaged a lot of people. And when you look at Pennsylvania, this was the state that had, Donald kicking Daffy, or, I don't know, I've messed that up, I think. But, Pennsylvania had some weird shapes on the congressional maps. The state house maps have some weird shapes. I've actually meant to run some down at one point. Like, this is all kind of going into my thinking as I think of what to write next. So, but, I've been asking people, like redistricting advocates, like, do you regret talking up shape so much? Because shape is easy to see, but you can draw a pretty gerrymander. Like, you can draw a map that looks gorgeous and divides up communities of interest and makes strategic choices and looks great. And sometimes like Pennsylvania has weird counties, as one Princeton gerrymandering attorney told me. And if you're trying to respect counties, which is like a very traditional way of drawing maps, because a county line are arbitrary, like they're completely arbitrary. They're old as hell and completely just like based off of whatever surveyors thought at the time. And, but if you respect those lines, your districts will look a little weird. I don't know. I think about, we have a county, and we have counties in southeastern PA that like technically isn't even contiguous. Chester County has this weird little dot of land that's completely surrounded by Delaware County. So, the question is, how much do you want to use shape? And I'll have more on that. And I think that it gets you 50% of the way there, but like, it also isn't the only thing. Something that has to be pointed out is that like that map, like, that district that he held up, it's a solid red district. And there are no districts around it are not solid red. Every district in that area, I'm looking at it, is red, is a Republican district. It is not as if that shape was drawn to scoot around blue areas and put all the red in one to pack that region. It was drawn because, as someone who has played with DRA, sometimes when drawing maps, you draw like you every person's going to come to it with some notion of what a district should be. I mean, like, honestly, I can just say, like, if you look at the area, it's because Williamsport, if you draw Williamsport as its own district, you are kind of left having to do something funky with the rest of Lycoming County to draw another district. And in this case, the something funky is the shape that Benninghoff held up. And, we can definitely talk about, is that shape best for the constituents of that area? Like I think that's a fair conversation, but that shape, I don't know if it's fair to say that shape was drawn to benefit Democrats. I mean, that shape was drawn because Williamsport exists, and unless you want to put a line down Williamsport and draw two nice compact districts next to each other, like, then you kind of might have to do something a little weird.
Well, right. And it's, if you take party totally out of it, right, just take all the partisanship out of it, and you sat somebody down and said, here, draw districts, and that's the nice thing about DRA, about the redistricting app, is that anybody can do it. And, you sit down and what ends up happening is common sense kind of just kicks in, right? You're like, okay, well, it just makes sense for this to be here. It makes sense for that to be there for various reasons. And you're right. We're not, like you said, we're dealing with lines for municipalities and counties that have been around for 250 years as compared to if you go out west, when everything's, square and even and, it's just the nature of the Commonwealth and the history that we kind of carry into this. So, and I will say that the Republicans, I'll give Kerry credit for this. They are masters at that kind of like easy symbolism. Like that's brilliant on their part. They took an all red district and held it up as an example of gerrymandering. Like that's beautiful. Like they're so much better at this than Democrats on that part of it, on the messaging part. But it's interesting because, I think the other thing is redistricting to me is something that it's one of those things that matters so much more to legislators than it does to the public, and I'm reading some of these press releases now, and I'm sure you've gotten all of them, and a lot of these legislators are just, kind of like screaming from the rooftops. And it feels like this is one of those issues where the overwhelming majority of voters just kind of don't care. It's like, oh, we're getting a new legislator. Okay. I had a district that was, I lost about 50% of it. And when I went in to district, they were like, oh, okay, you're a new legislator. All right. It wasn't like, you don't, unless it's something where there's a brazen party switch or something like that. You don't see people riot. This isn't the kind of thing that people are going to storm the Capitol over.
Yeah. So wait, you're saying specifically about like normal everyday voters caring about like having their legislator change, or like having their two legislators face each other in a primary, like that. Is that what you're specifically referring to?
I just don't think, unless you've got this is one of those things where unless you've got skin in the game, I just don't think voters care all that much.
The only thing I guess I would say is, what I feel relatively confident in from talking to people in the building and just like my general conversations and the very fact I'm having this conversation, the attention people have been paying, like it does seem like more people care about redistricting. I'm not, and it sounds like that's not what you were trying to say, but
I think people care about the process and the overall result. Right. I think people care about, okay, well, what's this going to look like when it's all done?
Yeah.
But I also think that when you get it down to a granular level, it's hard to get a lot of people riled up about what's going to happen in a specific district.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Jury will be out. I'm sure that would be a great thing for me to, once we start to get these maps more nailed down, figure out, and kind of one of those things on my list for when things are finalized and, maybe there's a little less COVID and I'm just going to have to start driving around this Commonwealth again.
Yes. So, yeah, and it's interesting because I one of the things that struck me is in the, from the op-ed sections, there was an op-ed in the Trib, Pittsburgh Tribune Review, which is, typically not, is typically fairly friendly to Republicans. And they wrote an op-ed saying, don't overreact to the GOP. It just said that Benninghoff here's the quote. It says, Benninghoff's protest isn't because the map is biased towards Democrats, it's because it's not quite as biased towards Republicans as he would like. And, it says his objections are unhelpful to his party. They make the majority look grasping as if more than half the pie is not nearly enough. He should follow Ward's example, work the process, and trust the voters. Which I thought was a pretty strong rebuke to Benninghoff's, from what should have been a friendly crowd, to kind of smack him down a little bit. And I'm curious to see, I was looking at a lot of press releases that a lot of other Republicans sent out, and there's some op-eds and things have gone out, and, they're screaming about constitutionality and this sort of thing. And I agree. They should definitely be, there are legitimate constitutional questions that should be litigated, if for no other reason, to set precedents, right? You'd rather set a precedent with I always thought, I'd rather set a precedent based on a well thought out map or legal theory that, where everybody was kind of working in good faith, even though there may be questions, as compared to some overly reactionary thing where the courts have to kind of look at a flawed product coming in. So, I think there's definitely going, the litigation part of it is good for the process. I just, my gut instinct is I don't see this becoming, I don't see a ton of changes unless they're arranged in house. I think one of the problems for Republicans is that if one of their arguments is about these new majority minority districts, the natural response is going to be that, okay, your argument is based in racism.
Well,
I mean, that's a tough, I'm just saying,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Place for them. That's a tough hill for them to plant their flag on.
So it's where I think it would come from, and there's this Atlantic piece that focuses more on congressional maps, but I think the idea, to me, I wrote a story that tried to look at this, and it was before we saw these maps, but I don't know, I feel like I just saw this tension of there's this Jason Torchinsky. He is a Republican attorney who has done work for Pennsylvania Republicans in the past. He's a national reporter. He's a national lawyer, attorney, but I believe he is Philadelphia based, and I believe he was like helped or like was brought on to do some of the 2020 litigation. He was quoted in this Atlantic piece saying that, Republicans are not going, I'm paraphrasing, some of the effect of like, if anyone tries to use the Voting Rights Act to justify districts that are not actually one single minority group, like that, the districts that have a majority of one single minority groups, if there are districts that are justified by a VRA that are not majority black, like majority 50% plus one black, not majority Latino 50% plus one Latino, that he would take a dim view of that. So it could be So all I was going to say is like that could certainly be a frame, what you described. And I think that, and this whole push to sort of unpack minority voters, this idea that like white voters are willing to vote with black voters, and black voters don't have to have a super majority district to get what they want, is sort of this back and forth that I think has happened in redistricting law. I remember 538 had an excellent podcast on this in like 2018 that I remember listening to. Like, I think this is my understanding from some of the early conversation I've had is there's not like the case law on this is kind of fresh, and could be a lot of precedent set. So I am watching how that goes, because I myself am very interested in it. And some early conversations tell me that I don't think I'm alone in wanting to watch how that develops.
No, that's a really fair point. And I think one of the other things that is interesting is that, well, there's two parts of it. One is, I agree, just by saying, okay, we're going to put black and brown people together, and that therefore constitutes a majority minority district. I mean, that's very problematic in of itself.
Well, that's what the VRA does. I mean, it's right. Like there is. I don't write for the Atlantic, so I don't get 3,000 words to describe all my feelings on this, and I'm not as intelligent as Ta-Nehisi Coates, but I think there is a whole lot of things that could be said about, like, what does it say about American redistricting law that, like, it kind of runs on this idea that to have a multiracial democracy work, you need to push people together into VRA districts. I might have even said too much in saying that, but I don't know. I think about that a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of lawsuits about that and where the line is in the coming months. Yeah, and the other piece of this is, I think, especially when you talk about Hispanic voters, this idea that all Latino voters are Democrats is just, I think, a fallacy. Having worked with some different Latino advocacy groups and worked on some elections on the ground, and you look at some of the numbers, nationally, you run into a lot more Hispanic Republican voters than I think people realize. So I think it's also very dangerous, to just start painting any sort of, any minority group or anybody with a broad brush that, oh, well, if you're this, you must vote this. I mean, that's identity politics of the worst kind. And you're right. It creates some really interesting questions that there are no easy answers for. And, and they probably will never get addressed in any other venue other than a process like this. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to probably see some people try and get answers from it. And yeah, I think you're right. Like, there's no easy answers here. Like, I think there's like plenty of room for people to have good faith arguments on all sides of this issue. Like, that's why I'm enjoying covering it, because like, the hard part's basically just trying to figure out who's making good and bad faith arguments. But that's why I do the job I do.
Right. And you've done a great job of it. I've been following a lot of your stuff. I have more questions, but we're up on time, and I want to thank you for giving us the time that you did. Give us a plug for your Twitter and all that good stuff if anybody wants to follow you.
Yeah, so my work's at the Pennsylvania Capital Star, pencapital-star.com. I'm on Twitter at StephenJ_Caruso. I tweet a lot, so like don't if you follow me, just be prepared for a mix of like insider news, previews of what I'm reporting, and like some mild shit posting, and just I don't know, keep on reading. I appreciate our readers if you do read us, and look forward to any new eyes. We're doing this just to try and keep people informed about their 253 state legislators. I have to remind myself there's 253 of them quite often, and we pay all their salaries, so keep up on them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I hope I can have you back, because this has been very educational. And I want to know from your Twitter, I'm very curious about the trash fast food takes that some of the legislators that you said you have to deal with, which I thought was hilarious.
Well, if somebody is trashing pizzelles, like I kind of just, the Italian in me has to stand up.
That's fair. That's totally fair. I can, and as someone who used to come into this city and, as a guest, basically, and compared to someone who lives here now, it's, you definitely take a different view of these things. So I definitely, I hear you on that. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. Keep up the good work and have a great holiday.
Thank you, Jesse. Happy holidays.
All right. You too.